Morning everyone. Looking around the room this morning, I see a lot of faces that are familiar to me, and I guess mine is familiar to you. I also see some faces that are not so familiar to me, and that's important for the context of some of the message I want to get across this morning. So as George said, probably got a bit of an important role here in this first session to paint a bit of context of perhaps what is the current seasonal condition, where have we come from, and how do we keep track of where we are moving forward. So that's a broad synopsis of what I want to do this morning. And in order to do that, I'll firstly go back to this time last year. It should be very fresh in everybody's memory, the sort of conditions we were faced with this time last year. Then I want to put into context the recent 5-year period. Very important, depending on how much experience we have managing feed base in this environment. Then I'll run through some tools and resources that are available for what we can use to keep on top of the seasonal conditions. And I want you to always think about, well, what do you use? What tools do you prefer? What do you like to keep abreast of so that you are informed about what are the seasonal conditions and how you might change your decisions. There's no point hearing it from someone else. You need your own rules, your own tools, and your own guidelines. Who's got one of those? Does anybody have a crystal ball? Can anybody really tell what the season is going to play out like? Could anybody really tell just how dominant Donald Trump would win the election yesterday? I don't know there was too many pundits saying he was going to win in a landslide, but he did. So we don't have a crystal ball. This time last year, we'd just been through an autumn, winter and spring that were pretty dry. There were forecasts of doom and gloom, El Niños, hot summer temperatures, dry conditions. There was all sorts of things going on. I gave a presentation down the paddock, and it was hot and it was dry, and I was asking that question, dry, wet, and back to dry again? Is it risk on or is it risk off? How do you place yourself moving forward over the coming summer season? And the concluding message I gave at that time was risk off. All the indicators were looking like it's probably going to be a risk-off situation. What was the Bureau forecasting last spring? El Nino, hot and dry. How did the season turn out? I'll show you some numbers, which is really, really interesting. So hindsight, we all know, is 20/20. It's a wonderful thing. We don't have hindsight when we're looking forward. So this time last year, the projection for New South Wales looked brown and horrible. It looked like a hot, dry summer ahead. We had El Nino in the forecast. We had a positive Indian Ocean dipole. SAM was negative. So all the key indicators were looking like it was going to be a hot, dry summer. Conditions were going to be tough. And given the experience over the prior 6 or 7 months, I don't hold anything against a producer who said, no, I'm lightening off, I'm selling stock, because all the indicators were heading that way, and people's memories of the drought 2017, 2019 were incredibly fresh. So it's only human that I think that response went that way. Last year I gave a presentation of this graph. It's a change plot. Essentially, it is a cumulative total of how much each month we're away from the average. So if we're below average for the month, it's a minus. We add that to the tally. If we're above average for the month, it's a positive. So we add that to the tally. And this time last year, I was asking the question, had we reached another pivot? Had we reached a pivot where we were going to head back down into dry conditions? a reasonable question to ask, because over that previous period we were looking at low single-digit percentile rainfall. Very low, extreme shortage of rainfall. It looked like the worm had turned. So what happened? How good has it been the last 12 months? Really, how good has it been in the last 12 months? So let's have a look at some data. The top panel was the rainfall chart as of September last year, and you can see in the red box at the top there, those bars don't look too impressive. March was certainly an outlier. That guy there, certainly an outlier. Everything else below average. The bottom chart, we roll the rain gauge forward, and that's what we got. So 9 of the last 12 months, well above average. Over the last 13 months or so, nearly a metre of rain. How good has it been? Everybody growing winter crops this year have probably got smiles on their faces, as long as the storms don't come through later on. So now, if we update this change plot, now we can see we're still marching forward. We're still marching up. And if we group the rainfall over the last 5 years or so, we are actually looking at exceptionally wet conditions. Exceptionally wet. Above the 98th percentile. That means it's wetter than 98% of all prior 5-year periods. That's how wet it is. So I like to put this context in place. Let's look at some horrible graph. Horrible graph. I'm not going to attempt to explain this graph, but I want to convey the message that's in there. So there's a group of dots in this red box, and then there's a group of blue dots up the top running across the top. Now, what I can do with the rainfall data is that at any month in time over the entire record of the Tamworth rainfall record, I accumulate the tally over 1 month, 2 months looking back, 3 months looking back, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 12 months looking back, 2 years looking back, 3 years, 4 years, 7, etc., out to 30 years. And look at the amount of rainfall we have on a percentile basis, i.e. from 0 to 100%. So this time last year, what we saw was the 6 monthly rainfall tallies and less, so the cool season of last year, were all in what we call serious shortage or severe shortage, meaning they were less than the 10 percentile, even less than the 5 percentile. So extremely dry. You know how dry it was. But this actually puts it into context. I roll the data forward and update it for end of October this year. And you see all the blue diamonds. So now we look at the rainfall record, and it doesn't matter from 1 month through to 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. The tallies over all those periods are above average. Over all those periods. This really is a very unique period. The last time this happened for any sustained period was 1990, September 1990. I was third year at third year at university. Lester was in the district for sure. Birdie Nyes, you would have been in the district. Other people would have been in the district. Some of us, maybe not even born the last time this happened. To tabulate that, to get a handle on some of these numbers to show how good the last 5 years has been, I've pulled out the totals so you can see them. The last 12 months here at Tamworth, 949 millimetres, equivalent to around the 95th percentile. And this is just jumping down 1, 2 years, 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years and 5 years. You can run your eye down there. The 5-year tally, 4,188 millimetres, putting that in the rainfall record, going way back to 1889, at near the 98th percentile level. As wet as more than 98% of times. The numbers in parentheses here, the brackets if you like to call them brackets. That's the annualised number. So over the last 2 years, our annualised number, 770. Last 3 years, 864. Last 3.5 years, 841. Last 4 years, 871. The last 5-year average, 837 millimetres a year on average. This 60 months total has only exceeded 4,000 millimetres a few times in our rainfall record. The 1890s, none of us were here. 1952, some of us might have been very young. 2012, we're probably all here. So very rare times indeed. To show you that in another presentation, so you can see the zigs and the zags. The red circles I've just put around those periods I mentioned. 1950s, 2011, 2012, and the current one. So all above 4,000 millimetres for that 5-year total. So the question I want you to put in your mind is, how does your experience relate to that in terms of your experience of managing feed base? If you're a nice new agronomist in our district, hey, this is easy stuff. We can run anything we like here. This feed base is great because we're operating in that sort of rainfall environment. Myself, I came to the district there, right at the lowest ebb. Where do you start on that timeline of your experience in managing feed base? Maybe a couple in the front row here, they're back here. They've seen the things in the late 80s, early 80s and beyond. So I think it's quite important to put your context around what the rainfall record has been, because that guides your experience of what you've been doing. So how do we keep abreast? How do we keep abreast of the seasonal conditions as they unfold? There are three examples I'll run through of how I keep abreast of what might be happening and some suggestions. So firstly, rainfall data. It's our primary data. Everybody has a rain gauge, everybody has a rainfall sheet, everybody can see the tallies as they come through weeks and months and days as they progress. The second one, DPI has an excellent resource called the State Seasonal Update, and I'll show you some detail from that. And thirdly, I want to just show you what the farming forecaster can do for keeping abreast of those current conditions. Another version of that graph. I know you like that graph. No. I wanted to show you the power of being able to pull apart the rainfall data this way. I'm not saying that everybody's going to analyse their rainfall data like I do. I'm not saying that at all. But it helps put into context where we are today with our historical record of rainfall. I've got two traces here. The yellow dots on the bottom half of the graph, and again our blue diamonds at the top. So our blue diamonds, you've already seen that because it's October 2024, and as I've said, all the rainfall tallies over all those different periods are above the median. They're above normal conditions. The yellow dots was the state at October 2019. So really the peak of that drought, absolute peak. Now, what was amazing to me was that this line here is less than the 10 percentile. All of the periods from 1 month to all the way up to 7 years were, 8 years, were below the 10 percentile level. Extremely dry, extremely. Some of these tallies, because they're on the bottom, were the lowest on record. They're the lowest in the record of any 9-month, any 12-month, any 2-year, any 2.5-year, any 3-year period. Doesn't matter where you look in the rainfall record, that tally was the lowest in the record. So it was dry, absolutely. So I find this useful because it can put into context what our short seasonal type variation, where that's sitting, versus our longer time frames that probably start to guide what sort of forage base we really can get away with. So over that last 5 years, we've been running in an 800 plus millimetre rainfall environment. Makes growing grass a lot easier, doesn't it? If we're sitting in that sort of environment compared with a 450 millimetre environment. So I do that. I keep abreast of how things are panning out. So if you want to talk about that sort of stuff, I'm all ears. Now, something a little bit more hands-on and tangible for most people. DPI has spent a lot of time, money and effort trying to build a resource available for everybody to grasp what the seasonal conditions are doing across the state. And it's called this thing, the State Seasonal Update. This is a screenshot of the home page on the DPI website. And now it really is a one-stop shop for all things seasonal conditions. We have a New South Wales summary. We have what the indicators of rainfall, soil water, and pasture growth rate are doing. This is brand new. It was only released this week, and that's called a drought forecast. So now, looking forward 3 months from now, what will conditions likely look like and where will we be on the drought indicators? Direct linkages to the climate drivers. So if you want to know what El Nino is doing, ENSO, Southern Annular, the SAM, all those things. Regional breakdowns by LLSs, etc. So it really is a magnificent one-stop shop to navigate into. The climate group has a monthly update webinar, so I would recommend you signing up for that and sitting on that webinar once a month. It runs about half an hour or so, and they run over the conditions, but they also try to bring in a special flavour for each one. So what does it look like? The primary indicators that are in the seasonal update is what is called the combined drought indicator. The combined drought indicator has rainfall, soil moisture, and pasture growth rate as 3 key indicators. And when all of those indicators are below a certain threshold, it indicates drought. So the current conditions across New South Wales, this is at the end of October. We can see drought patches in the Mallee in the southwest of New South Wales. The Riverina, particularly the eastern Riverina, is actually experiencing drought at the moment. And we see these light green patches of recovering from drought. But the bulk of the state, it's the best it's been for some time, is in the non-drought status. We can drill into LLS regions. So for the LLS staff, I think they use this quite frequently. And for North West LLS, we can see some areas recovering from drought around Caputar and the Pilliga Outwash and the southwest of the Liverpool Plains, but for the rest of the region in non-drought status. Now, to get a sense of how things are changing through time, so that last picture was just the status at this point in time, this shows us how the conditions are changing. We can pull it out by parish, and these three examples, the Tamworth Parish, Coonabarabran Parish and the Narrabri Parish, and as the indicators fall down below certain thresholds, you'll see the bar change colour from non-drought to drought affected. So when they get below a certain threshold, we change into drought status. This is a great way of seeing where we sit compared to the recent past and what you might be experiencing on your property at the moment. You'll notice that they have different shapes. Can you see that the one at the top, the Tamworth one, going along nicely and then all of a sudden just dropping down quite sharply? The Coonabarabran one was more of a slow slide down into drought, but also a slow grind out of the drought conditions. Narrabri also a bit steep and a little bit less quickly coming out of drought. We can get more granular now as well. This is a new addition, and now what we can pull up is 5 years. So now going back to 2019. So you can see the dynamic of when we're going above and below these certain thresholds, triggering the drought status or non-drought affected. So you can see at the moment the worms are certainly climbing north, aren't they? One point I'd like to just draw your attention to on this is the actual timing of where it goes from non-drought to drought affected. Now, if you've got good enough eyes, you'll see that that's pointing to around September last year. You know what it was like September last year. You probably would have said we were already in drought, weren't we, Sean? It was pretty dry and horrible. Why is it still green and only going into brown for drought affected then? The point is that for the drought signal to be created, we have to have all the indicators fall down to that level. So soil water is lagging. It might stop raining, but it takes a while longer for the soil water to be depleted. So they tend to be a bit of a lagging indicator. So, bringing us to the outlook. That crystal ball, someone got that crystal ball handy? The Bureau is suggesting the 3-month outlook for New South Wales is pretty positive. It's looking quite nice. In the red box, northern New South Wales, it looks like the chance of exceeding median rainfall is quite good. 55 to 75% chance of being above median rainfall over the next 3 months. That'd be great. That'd be great. But remember what the forecast was last September? So, a new addition to the seasonal update is the drought forecast. Now, this has taken a long time to develop, a long time to bring to fruition, but again, possibly a useful addition. On the drought forecast page, there are 4 panels of New South Wales as shown. The top left one is the current state, 31st of October. The one on the top right is the projection for 3 months forward, so to the 31st of January 2025. So that basically shows a continuing improvement of conditions across New South Wales through the large part of summer. Apart from the Mallee in the southwest, and again that Riverina area, particularly the eastern Riverina. But remember, they don't generally expect too much summer rainfall anyway, so you probably wouldn't expect conditions to improve over summer down there. The bottom 2 panels are what they use as the agreement for the ensemble of models that they're using to forecast these conditions. And the bottom right one is the past accuracy. So how reliable are the models? They're pretty reliable at this time of the year, sitting between 40 and 60% reliability across most of Australia, New South Wales. So crystal ball's looking good. Farming Forecaster. Who is familiar with the Farming Forecaster platform? Surely there's an LLS hand that might go up. Oh yes, there they are, thank you. There's a couple. Yeah. Farming Forecaster is a platform that incorporates both local weather station and soil moisture probe and pasture modelling to indicate current conditions. There are a lot more sites further south in New South Wales. Slowly but surely they're coming up north. This is from Hunter LLS. But what it gives us is this chance to look across the region and where the probes are located, and we can see what the soil moisture status is sitting at across that range of networks. Not too much green there as of yesterday, is there? In the orange, a couple of sites in the low, red in the bottom corner there. But it gives us a chance to look across the region. So if you see all the sites in the green, well, that's good. If you see all the sites tending into the red, that's not so good. So it's a great way of looking across the region. If we drill into an individual site and we open up the web page for an individual site, we see lots of information, but on the first thing I point out is the soil moisture status, and that's on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side is the pasture conditions against historical. There's a lot of information, whoopsies, wrong button. There's a lot of information available there to digest, and I'm not going to do that now. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that, well, now we can see more granular what the current pasture conditions are doing in terms of availability. We can see the historical averages, and we can also see some forecasts for what might be ahead. So that gives us some context, further context of how this year's playing out versus what we've seen in the past. We can drill further into there to look at soil moisture. And for all you people who know me, I love soil moisture because with no soil moisture, we don't grow anything. We need rainfall first to get the water into the soil, but without soil moisture, things fall down very quickly. So we can look at the past 12 months in one panel and what soil moisture is doing through time in relation to rainfall. But importantly, we can compare it against any prior 12-month period. So what was happening last year at this point in time, or what was happening 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Then ask yourself, what decisions did I make back then? And what was the outcome? So it's a really good way of you cross-checking your decisions you made in context of what the conditions were doing at the time. That took 7 minutes longer than I wanted to, but that's okay. So what tools do you use? What way do you keep track of seasonal conditions? Do you rely upon bozos like me giving you presentations like this? Or do you have your own indicators, your own values, your own tools, your own resources that you like to use to keep abreast of seasonal conditions? I'll leave it at that. Any questions or comments or contributions? Bev? Yeah, so the question roughly from Brett was, how do we digest the variability in conditions across the Pacific Ocean? How are conditions playing out to arrive at that forecast? the 3-month outlook for rainfall I put up there of the probabilities. That's the Bureau's conclusion from their ensemble of models that they use for making those conclusions.
What's after that?
What's after 3 months? Crystal ball. So I guess one of my messages out of what I wanted to show you today was it doesn't really matter what the forecasts are. It matters what you experience on your place through the seasons and how you keep track of it in order to have your decision points. Tony, you got some comments?
Yeah, I think that was fantastic.
Yeah, so Tony's asking questions about the variability of the seasonal conditions spatially from one area to the next, and also through time. He asked about the variability, comment on that. I would say absolutely. The increase in variability as the seasons roll by, absolutely agree. And those percentile charts, that horrible looking graph I showed, that percentile chart is really powerful at showing you that variability in your rainfall record. That variability, again, I think that brings to the fore for the localized monitoring of the conditions, whatever tools you're using, to know where you sit. Because as you say, you can't rely upon the Tamworth rainfall record if you go to Oganville and it's desert. So, you can't just take that one message as equal for the whole region. Variability, it's a big thing. And what I see in the rainfall is the dollops of rain that we get now. The dollops, they come in big dollops, high intensity, shorter duration. That has implications for the water cycle, which is another whole topic of a discussion from my point of view. How do we best capture that rainfall? How are we best situated at any given point in time to capture whatever rainfall we receive to combat that variability?
Thanks, Sean. Very good.
So how do we maintain a forage base? This is the sort of flavour of today. If we're dealing with these cycles of wet periods and dry periods over 5 years, but then we also get this huge variation month to month and season to season, how do we maintain our forage base?